Welcome to part 2 of my post-mortem lore walkthrough. Let's not delay, it's kind of long. Let's just get into it.
No,
Dude, he's like
no,
a peeled
I didn't.
apple. He's more tasty.
Season 3 of Autocraft started like most Minecraft seasons do. Pranks, jokes, shenanigans, death, and discussions about the ethical concerns about raising villagers to be indentured servants. In the preseason, Mindstorm and I had discussed a few ideas. We had agreed on a mutual story arc. Most of the things that happened in my first 2 or 3 episodes was almost exclusively his thought process. His first episode was incredible, ended very well, left a lot of room for creativity, and then he just kind of up and ghosted. No explanation as to why, which is a real shame because I really liked what he was doing and where he was going with it. This left me in a bit of a conundrum, as I had already started my world building process, and it was based almost exclusively off of what he was doing. By the time I realized he wasn't coming back, I had most of the outline written out. So now I needed an explanation that could fit within my story arc without needing to rewrite everything and hopefully not having major plot holes. At that point, it took me a little bit to come up with the idea of how to do this. The result was to having the antagonist of my story completely taking him out and killing him. That's the sacrifice. I didn't create this explanation until I knew for certain that he wasn't returning. So I had to go back in time after it happened to explain what happened. I wasn't a fan of this, but it was something that became necessary. Completely abandoning the storyline and starting completely over felt like even a worse idea. I felt like doing this gave me room to sit down, breathe, think it through, and figure out what to do next. Looking back on it, this was definitely the right decision. I started putting tiny lore drops in the last 30 seconds of a lot of my episodes. The first one was just after I finished my manor house where I logged out and Tyr suddenly showed up. The explanation for this is that it could only happen because he became corporeal as long as I was not logged in. As soon as I logged in, he disappeared from where I was at and he was inside of my head again. The cathedral build was something that took me years to do. I did a lot of research in real cathedrals, including Notre Dame. The frame of the cathedral was extremely similar to a build that I had screenshots of from 2013. I took design pieces and expanded every single direction, changing the shape of both the interior and exterior of the ceiling, including increasing the size of the flying buttresses to fit with the increased scale. By the time the build process had started, I had sunk close to 100 hours in just the planning stages itself. This was one of those buildings I always wanted to do but had no reason to do it. It was easier to justify spending the time if I had a good lore reason behind it. This building was a completely different palette originally. Most people used stone and chiseled stone and diorite and gold blocks and iron blocks, and it was just bright and colorful, and it was a much more opulent build, and I decided it was way too bright, way too lively, way too alive, and I wanted it to be a bit more dark and I wanted to be more menacing. So I changed the block palette out completely, swapped out the floor, put in the fog glass because I like this idea that if he looks down into it, there's this something really not right from underneath the cathedral, why there was this kind of eerie back and forth that I wanted to figure out how to make this color pulse, especially at night, because it just seemed like it would be really, really fun to do. I really wanted to push the idea that there was something just very, very wrong in this building. The sacrificial chamber underneath it probably took me another 20 to 30 hours. The door that led down to it that was sunk flush to the floor, I can't take credit for. It was a door that someone developed in Bedrock, created, posted on YouTube. I figured out how to build it and then how to re-engineer it for Java, which took 6 or 7 hours. The whole point behind the sacrificial chamber is it should be directly underneath the courtyard. Originally, I was going to have it be a separate room that offshoots down the hallway, down towards where the chamber itself was, and I just kind of ran into space complications and time and placements, and I was pushing to my slime farm, and there was all kinds of issues, so I decided to scrap it. But I like the idea of this being this huge labyrinth with chambers and rooms. The major hitch I was having at the time was finding a way to fully separate myself from Tyr. And the thing I called the Skulk Monster is what I came up with at the time. I don't think I ever really gave it a name because it was supposed to be Mindstorm.
Ivo would do.
I'm sorry, what?
I want your eye.
Rusty asking me to take my eye for his Halloween costume presented me with a very unique opportunity. Not only because it was Rusty, which was appropriate lore-wise, but it helped me establish kind of an important point that I was no longer whole. Incidentally, Lacey left me some shulkers and a phantom in a boat, which this sparked so many ideas that left me to capturing more and then learning them to my building and leaving them at the ceiling because I just like the ideas of my cathedral being infested with phantoms. But in the end, I think I captured some in the vicinity of 30 phantoms. They kept dying on the brazier, so I had to put the glass ceiling in. It was just after Halloween that I came up with a way to justify the separation of myself and Tyr, which resulted in this lightning strike. The idea was that this time Odin and Thor had found Tyr's body floating in the void and used Heimdall and Thor basically to manufacture a one-shot attempt at returning Tyr's body. They were completely unaware of what would happen to me, and frankly, they just didn't care. The lightning storm was something that was essentially manufactured, although I never figured out lore-wise how it would happen. Now, this scene is a little bit different than how I actually intended it to be. Originally, what was going to happen was the Skulk monster thing was going to show up, it was going to walk inside, it was going to transform into a villager, and then walk off and join the other villagers I've already got. So Tyr is here, thinking he's killing the thing that is going to allow him to go home, not realizing that that's not what happened. So by the time this event occurs, Tyr's already had contact with Hugin and Munin. Now that's the first time I've mentioned these two names. Let me give you some context. Odin has 2 ravens which he uses to help keep track of the things going on in the 9 realms, and these 2 ravens are special and they're able to traverse the void in between realms, which is why they're able to get here but no one else is. And that's of course Hugin and Munin. And while this is a small detail, it's kind of important for later. I want to talk about the village area for just a minute. Nearly everything within the bamboo circle was part of the storyline one way or another. I was creating a history for the village and everything in it. The idea that the village had been there for a very, very long time. It had been destroyed at least once, rebuilt, and then abandoned, due for unknown reasons. This was to give the area kind of more of a storied history. Things had happened here, the chamber underneath had been there a long time, it was still in use by something, and I wanted to leave this open a little bit, because I wanted to have some creative liberties with it. But I am done with this village, FYI. I'm not carrying this forward to another season. This feels complete as it is, and I really like how it turned out. But for example, some of the things I thought about as I was putting the whole thing together is there was an inn on one side of the bamboo circle where travelers might have come in and stayed to go visit the cathedral, the church, or whatever business they had there. There was a blacksmith, a guard tower, government buildings, and even a tavern. One exception was the burnt scorched path was an explanation to what might have happened to the original buildings, which is why those buildings on that edge are complete ruins. There was going to be an abandoned graveyard in this spot, I just never finished it. The farmhouse was built part of that concept of a working village recently abandoned. I also needed to give Tyr a way to keep an eye on me and occasionally steal food. I largely used the Christmas stream weekend as a mechanism to continue to push the story forward. The flashback sequence shows events that had happened right up to the point where we separated bodies. I rather ambushed Sherbert with the eye and he just rolled with it. I was very impressed with his improv. But it was this point where I started to scatter lore throughout every single episode. There were some subtext, big pieces were straight up in your faces. There were some things where I would half say sentences and then pull back a little bit. You'll see that a little bit later. But for the most part, every episode from here forward had something to do with the story I was building. I love mods. It made some of these things so much easier. This is one of my favorite openings. I really like this idea of a convergence that crossed over and brought something rather evil with it. And this evil is part of what crept into the world that made things kind of what they are. Honestly, I couldn't help but throw in the timeshare line. It was too funny to pass up. I don't even care if anyone else thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. I had to do it. I'm happy about that. But what I need to address is this right there. This has been there since October. And I have been avoiding it. And now I can't anymore. This is a rather large turning point for Anki. He is fully aware that things have been building. He knows it needs to be dealt with, and he's been avoiding it actively because it means confronting himself. So to him, Tyr wasn't just another person. They shared a body, they kind of shared a soul to a point. There was an intrinsic bond formed that actually really scared him because he didn't fully understand what was going on. And so he'd been actively pretending like he didn't see anything, even though he actively saw stuff all the time. Of course we've got our thunder lightning storm right now. Of course we do, because that's not mood appropriate at the moment. Interestingly enough, the lightning was not planned. It was pure circumstance, which was just beautiful because it made everything so much more foreboding. It was like a planned thing in a movie where it's scary and kaboom, and it was great. I was so thrilled with it. And I really leaned into that in the opening of the next episode, which is hands down probably the best thing I've done in a really long time, maybe ever. So where do we start?
How about at the beginning?
I cannot begin to tell you how long this took me. I spent nearly as much time on the sound design as I did the animation. At this point, I had fully committed myself to fully animated the finale, which I have mixed feelings on. If you've seen my burnout video, you'll understand what I mean. This video itself is a mixture of Blender and mods and Minimator filters and sounds and voice alterations. It's crazy. The timeline on this is such a mess. It's wild. But my favorite thing is still that first 10 seconds with the rain, the thunder, and where the piano for the background music kicks in. Just chef's kiss. I'm so proud of myself for that. And I've watched it 100 times and it still just grabs me.
Surely fit.
Hold on. Did you just say you have my memories?
Yes, I do. Everything between when you initially died and when we separated again. Every thought you had, every memory you recalled, I have all of those.
Okay. So that means you remember that one time when...
Yes, and I don't want to talk about it.
But...
Anki, shut it.
All right. Fine. I really love the idea of the two of them having this inside joke that no one else knew anything about. I kept expecting people to ask me about it and me just going, well, private things remain private, but no one ever said a word. It kind of made me sad, actually. Every time I cut back to these two, I made a point of changing the scene. He's leaning against the chair, he's against the wall, that they're drinking bottles, now there's bottles on the table. He's cleaning them up. Anki's throwing a slime ball in the air. I wanted to show a passage of time. And this was the only way I could really think of making it work well. To be perfectly honest, I really wanted to do blooper reel with this because it doesn't actually go all the way to bedrock. It goes down about 50 layers and then there's a layer of slime blocks with wool carpet. So if you fell, no one would actually die. And I liked this idea of like Tyr pushing Anki off and having him fall off the edge and then bouncing up and down. Every time Anki comes up, he's laying down or he's like in some kind of other pose, something like you'd see in a Saturday morning cartoon. I love this notion. I just never got around to it. The rest of the animation took me so long that I just lost steam for it.
You okay, Anki? You look distracted.
This conversation with Rusty was actually very important because this was the lead-in to the finale. Originally, I was going to leave a letter at his house and it would say, "Come meet me at my cathedral at sundown on XX day." And he would initially object. I'm not going. He's just going to pull another prank on me. He's been doing it all season. I'm not going. But as the sun set, he's like, crap. What if he's actually in trouble? I have to go. Which is why he shows up late, but he does show up. But when he gets there, he realizes, oh no, this is why I need to be here. And he just understands immediately what needs to happen.
Lay in that shot. Oh.
Oh no.
That is...
Test subject?
That's the clay order.
Okay, so the test subject line was something I asked Tom to do at the time. This was part of a whole nother story arc ongoing on the server between the Clay Order and the Mud Society. And what I wanted to do was give this illusion that the zombies were the result of the Skulk monster thing doing tests on the former inhabitants of the village, which is why it's now abandoned. And he's labeled them as such, which is why they're being killed by these test subjects. And so there was this connection all the way through, which I was going to try and like add into the finale. I was going to have a whole laboratory, and I just ran out of time to fully flesh that out. But that's what that is. That was actually something I actually asked Tom to do, and I'm really grateful for it because I'm sure it took them a long time. They had so many zombies. I'm really impressed. Now the finale. The finale, 400, 500, 600 hours. I don't even know. There's so many tiny details in here that I didn't even stop to think about that I would need to add or want to add that I realize in hindsight were not necessary. Some of them I want to point out because there's a few things that got skipped and I left out, partially because of time, partially because my own sanity, partially because I realized that it really wasn't as important as I thought it was. The thing about doing something like this is there's a lot of stuff that you add as an animator because it's cool, or the physics are correct, or this would be really neat because this is how it actually works in real world. And the fact of the matter is like 90% of it no one's actually going to notice. There's a scene when they first walk through the door and then fire their crossbows, and Tyr chucks the crossbow over his shoulder and it hits the wall, hits the glass, hits the ground, and rattles and shakes on the ground. And I have a tiny little like sound sample underneath it of that kind of sound effect. And I don't even know that anyone even noticed it. There are a few things here I am going to point out because they are lore relevant, and they got skipped just because time. Again, just time. The music I used for this is a track called Bound by Purpose by 12 Titans Music, and it's just ironically named, and it worked very well. There's a couple of things in here that are really kind of important to notice. Like, first of all, right here, Tyr has the sword, looks at it, realizes what it is, which is a dark elf sword, realizes now who he's dealing with, and now he's handling this a lot more seriously, because that's a problem. This right here, Tyr cuts the medallion off of his neck, which is the thing that's bound him here. And this is the thing that only Rusty can destroy, which is why it's important that Rusty needs to be here in the first place. The teleporting thing was kind of an afterthought, and I really liked how it turned out. One of my favorite parts in this whole animation comes up right here as the arrows fly onto the screen. Anki realizes he's in trouble. Tyr can feel Rusty coming, but Anki can't. So here comes the arrows, and then Rusty comes out of the middle of nowhere, and the music just works really well on this spot. Rusty, for whatever reason, inherently knows what needs to happen. And the reason why his eyes are glowing is just because it's the remnant of his ancestral, like, dragon history, and it's gone. Just burned out with that. But it took care of the issue. And he was the only one, again, that could actually do this in the first place. Now, Tyr's eye is glowing because now his power's back. But the thing I want you to notice right here is so is Anki's arm. Now, the reason why this is important is because Anki's arm is Tyr's arm, which means Anki has part of Tyr's godly powers imbued in him, which is why he's able to survive some of the things he is. It's also the reason why, by my own headcanon, he can actually take the Bifrost when this is done. The inclusion of the Phantom was a last minute thought, and I loved how it turned out. It was just great. The details that I put in here, like where they're jumping off of the top of the chimney, is something that I don't think anyone really noticed. There's also a spot where he turns around and he backhands Tyr, like gives him an elbow to the face, and he reacts, and it happens so fast that no one notices. And slice. This, I was really proud of myself to figure out how to Thanos snap him. It was great.
Ready to go home.
I didn't know what else to do with Rusty at this point. So it was just this, because I didn't ask him to voice over any lines because I didn't know how much longer it was going to take me, and he was getting ready for the next season. There was a lot going on, but that wraps it up. So the only thing left is my entrance back into Autocraft for Season 4, which I did with a meteor strike landing in the woods not too far away from Starter Town. And it's all pretty well self-explanatory. The one thing I do want to make a clarification on is part of the dialogue is I tell people I was in jail because involving a bottle of mead, a cloak that turns you into a raven, and Freya. Now, this has a lot more connotation to it than people, or well, rather, people took connotation out of it that was not intended. So according to Nordic lore, Freya was given a cloak by some dwarven master crafter that turns you into a raven when you put it on. And what I had decided my own headcanon was is everyone was drinking some mead, and I got dared to crawl into her room and steal her cloak, and I got caught and thrown into jail. And then the punishment was shove him in a mediator, shove him back to Midgard because he does not belong here anymore. And that's that. I wasn't gonna go full circle with Rusty with this, but I kind of had to because he was there at the end, and I loved the dialogue I wrote up here where he's like, well, what do you want me to do? I left it open like this so people who watched episode 1 would see me crashing in a mediator and go, wait, and want to go back to the previous season and watch episodes. It's a hook. Did it work? I don't know, but it was fun. And as the sun sets behind me, so does this 2-part series. I thought it was going to be 3, but it only ended up being 2. Thank you for everyone who came and participated and all that. Everyone, seriously, just thank you for being here. And super appreciate Rusty, because I kind of threw him under the bus for some of this, and he just ran with it, and I really appreciate you, dude. But other than that, we will, there's more stuff coming, more Autocraft episodes coming. I'm planning some mod stuff soon. I broke a carpet, that's fine. So there's things coming on the channel. I will see everybody soon. Goodbye for now.